Well, hello there. Let's see if we can make a go of this. Let's see if we can make this work. I do apologise profusely, really do. So, let's hope that this works properly, because I have no idea what happened there. And because my live stream just went all to pot and went really badly wrong. So I'm just going to prattle on and wait till we get people into the chat, so then I know that I'm not talking to me Jack Jones. Now, I was planning on doing this yesterday, but I had phone calls coming out of my backside because I needed to get a call to my doctor, and hello there, Simon says, and hello there, Ruth Guthrie, and hello there, Ben Shaw. I do solemnly really apologise for all that, because I have no idea what happened with my live stream. It just went all to pot and went really badly, and just making sure everything's all going right. Give me a quick minute. Stream is healthy, and that's a relief. But anyway, let's get back to this. And hello, Billy Kershaw. Hello, Mr. President. You're speaking to the nation. Yes, my running mate, my VP, Billy Kershaw. Hello, Andy. Andy Guthbertson. I'll hope you well. And yeah, I really do apologise for that, because it just did my noggin in. With this, what do you call it? Now, just give me a quick minute to get it all, get what, there we go. We're all cooking on gas. Right, now, what this basically was is this was on Tuesday, if I remember rightly. It was a Science and Technology Committee meeting, and as I was looking all over it, but yeah, as I say, I was desperately looking around for, well, see what select committee, and I noticed this, and I thought, I'll just watch this. And it was all about basically the lessons learnt on the vaccine rollout. And I thought, ooh, very interesting. I thought, and I watched it, and there was some very interesting. Of course, yeah, unfortunately, I know there's a bit of the coughing dodges, but there are some. Yeah, I suppose you're right there, Simon says, I do forget. Terrible shill, but yeah, say like and give it a like. It all helps with the algorithm, so they say. Don't seem to do me any favours, but it doesn't matter, does it? It's not as if I'm making money out of this. But anyway, yeah, absolutely, Ben Shaw, desperately in need of something other than Sheila Fogarty in the afternoon. To be fair, I don't really, if I'm honest, I don't go beyond 1 o'clock because I listen 10 1 while I'm just hunting around for material, and then I do whatever I need to do. But I've decided, since now the select committees are coming, and I've heard from a lot of people say, I love it when you do the select committee meetings, and there are some really good ones, but more often than not, they don't get much of the attention, which is fair enough, It's always difficult to get people interested, so I just thought, why don't I just do some live streams of ones? And this one caught my eye because it was about lessons being learnt about the vaccine rollout. And what I'll do is I'll let the chair of the Science and Technology Select Committee just basically introduce the guests, and what they have to say is very interesting, and some of the questions that are asked are very interesting. And the European Union do get a mention, and what they say about the European Union, if I remember rightly, was very eye-opening. So let's get into it before you lose interest. So let's enjoy.
Witnesses to the committee's one-off session looking at lessons learned from the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. And in particular, we're focusing, I think, on the scale-up of vaccine manufacturing that enabled so many doses to be produced so very quickly in the UK. I'd like to welcome a range of witnesses: Professor Sandy Douglas, Associate Professor at the Jenner Institute in the University of Oxford's Nuffield Department of Clinical Medicine; Dr. Adam Ritchie, Senior Vaccinologist, also at Oxford's Jenner Institute; Professor Catherine Green, Associate Professor in the Wellcome Centre for Human Genetics at the University of Oxford; and Dr. James Miskin, former Chief Technology Officer at Oxford BioMedica. The session.
So you're not going to get any bollocks from these guys. You're going to get experts, aren't you? And unlike Michael Gove, we're not sick to death of experts, are we? So you're going to get really good answers and expert answers, I suppose, and intelligent replies. None of the bollocks you're going to get from lying toe rag MPs.
The session is being broadcast on Parliament Live TV, and a full transcript will be taken and it'll be sent to you shortly after the meeting to make any minor corrections. And if you think of anything that you think would have been of interest to us that you didn't manage to say, or any data that you think might be helpful to us, we'd be delighted to receive that as formal written evidence after this session. So let me kick off with just asking you each very briefly to set out what your role was during the COVID-19 pandemic and the vaccine rollout, and what you felt made the UK's vaccine rollout ultimately successful. So I'll start with Professor Green and move along the row.
Thank you, Baroness Brown. I head the University of Oxford Clinical Biomanufacturing Facility. So we manufacture medicines for early phase clinical trials. And during the COVID rollout, we made the very first batch that then enabled the trial to start very early. So the UK trial for the COVID Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine started in April. And we did the manufacturing for that batch in conjunction with Sandy and others at the University of Oxford, getting that material ready to start the trials fast. I think that was one of the reasons that we were so effective at getting the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine rolled out in rapid delivery time, was that ability to start clinical trials quickly, because the trial takes quite a long time to deliver the results that the vaccine is working. So the earlier you can start, the better. And I think that within Oxford, we rapidly initiated the early stages of development of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. We were starting that, really having conversations in January about getting the ball rolling. I think that's one of the key things we did well for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine.
Thank you. Dr. Ritchie.
I'm Adam Ritchie, as mentioned. During the pandemic, Kath, Sandy and I and three other colleagues in February 2020 sat together in a room and discussed what was this thing that was happening overseas, and should we pull the trigger on accelerating a program to try and deliver a vaccine that might work for it, remembering at that time we had no idea if the vaccine candidate we had would work at all. We agreed in that meeting to do that. And it was sort of thought, well, this will run like a normal vaccine program where we work as a small team and everyone does a bit of everything. A week or two later, we took different responsibilities on. Sandy and I took over the plan to deliver a large-scale manufacturing process. We obviously worked very closely with Kath and her team, who were doing the initial manufacturing, but we were trying to address the question, how would you make initially tens of millions of doses of this vaccine on a timeline that would make a difference to a pandemic that appeared to be emerging, and that quickly scaled up to billions of doses over the coming months. Sandy and I primarily ran that program from February to May 2020 out of our offices in Oxford. AstraZeneca took over effectively in the middle of May 2020, at which time we shifted to working closely with them to deliver the increasingly large-scale program to manufacture as much of this as quickly as possible.
And what do you think, what enabled you to do that? As you say, you got together very early on, before this had really hit the UK. Was there something that enabled that to happen?
Yeah, so some of it is luck and some of it is making your own luck, sort of by design. So we have people who are always looking for what is the next potential pandemic. We had a platform that was developed to potentially deal with a new unknown disease. That became the basis of the vaccine. So those were things that were there by design. A few personalities and a few people, and we were able to make, at times significant professional and personal risk, make some decisions to go quickly in a way that maybe a larger organisation wouldn't have been able to. But also we had bits of luck in that, for instance, in 2017 to 2019, Sandy and I had been working to try and develop large-scale manufacturing for a similar vaccine, but against rabies. The background of that's not overly important, but it allowed us to, in 2019, at Kath's facility, use part of that new manufacturing process at a smaller scale for the first time to enable our rabies clinical trials to happen. The fact that work had taken place was what we built in 2020, January, February, March and beyond. That's what we built the large-scale manufacturing platform on, and it was a little bit lucky that it happened on that time frame.
Thank you. After we'll come back to some of those issues.
Imagine so.
Dr. Miskin.
Yeah. First of all, I'm James Miskin. I'm the former Chief Technical Officer of Oxford BioMedica. At the time of the pandemic, I was a member of the senior executive team within the company with leadership responsibilities for a number of areas of the business. I stepped down from my role at OXB back in May of this year, so what I'm saying today is my own personal opinion. During the pandemic, I think as an individual, the first sort of direct involvement we got was actually a phone call from Sandy and a colleague, Adrian Hill, from the Jenner in February of 2020, basically encouraging Oxford BioMedica as a company to get involved in some way. As a listed company, that was somewhat challenging to make a decision if you didn't know what it was that you were going to do. So I then spent the next several weeks working with my colleagues within the company to commit in some way or other to what had already been formed, which was the University of Oxford Consortium. One thing I should say is, you asked what made it successful. I think Adam's already touched on this. It was a group of like-minded individuals within the university that pulled together a sort of high concept plan. That concept plan was built upon by members of the industry that were brought in following a survey that was conducted by the BIA early in 2020. OXB and other organisations joined in to that consortium and to that plan. And I think, again, as Adam said, AstraZeneca joined formally in May of 2020, but by that stage, quite a lot of progress, quite a lot of thinking, quite a lot of planning had happened, and AZ took the choice, which they would have had at the time, to basically take that plan and, if anything, accelerate it. So one of my concerns was that they would look at it and say, that's not right, we'll do something different. They didn't do that. What they did is accelerate what was already in place.
And I think we'll also be interested in coming back to the impacts on companies who got involved of the way some of the government's actions hand out as the vaccines changed through the over time. So we'd be interested in hearing more of that, I'm sure. Professor Douglas.
I'm Sandy Douglas. My background is a medical doctor. I lead a research group in the Jenner Institute developing new vaccines. One of our interests is the development of new methods for making new vaccines. So just to briefly explain the relationship between my team and Kath's. Kath runs a facility that actually makes clinical grade vaccine that will actually go into people. My team figure out how to do that and transfer the methods to Kath. So why was it a success? I mean, so within Oxford, there's no such thing as overnight success. We had a technical and an organisational capacity, and each of those things are equally important, built up over more than a decade to address other problems, difficult vaccines against malaria, TB principally, and that proved to be repurposable, including, very importantly, the facility that Kath runs, which very unusually for a university gives us the capability to autonomously in-house make a batch of vaccine that can go into people. I don't think many other universities, if any, in Europe have access to that. Beyond Oxford in UK industry, we were phenomenally lucky that we just in February 2020 had enough connections to be able to put out essentially a distress call. Kath sent an email to the UK Bioindustry Association mailing list that basically said, help, we don't know how to make vaccines at large scale, who can help? And we got a set of supportive responses from various small contract manufacturing organisations, and I and my team with Adam, we were able to stitch that together into a consortium which might plausibly be able to make the vaccine at large scale. So it's important to appreciate that early stage of the work through to April 2020 was not only not backed by any meaningful government funding for large-scale manufacturing, but also it didn't involve Big Pharma. AZ played an incredibly important role, but the core of the plan for manufacturing the vaccine at large scale was formed by small contract manufacturing businesses and medium-sized like James's. And then in government, I think you probably already know some of the things that went well. I mean, Patrick Vallance played an extremely important role early on. We were very, very lucky indeed that he was the chief scientific advisor at that time, given his background, and clearly he was instrumental in setting up the vaccines task force, which from its inception played a hugely positive role, and its portfolio approach was critical, backing more than one horse. The UK didn't have all its eggs in one vaccine basket. Perhaps slightly less obvious, but equally critical within government, we could not have done this without the MHRA. So a core part of the reason that the UK is able to be innovative in this space is that we have a highly capable, responsive, or we had a highly capable, responsive regulator. And they were able to not just turn around applications and review things in real time as we sent them in, but also they had the experience, the expertise to look at new ways of doing things and say, okay, well, that's not how it's been done before, but we can see that that would be safe. And so go ahead. So that regulatory capability is absolutely pivotal for our ability to innovate, and a key responsibility of government, in my view.
Thank you.
Very interesting. That's good afternoon, Derek Mulready. Is it Mulready or Mulready? I think probably be Mulready, won't it? If I've said it wrong, I do apologise. Please forgive me. These professors are teaching your students in the universities to become the medical professionals of the 21st century. Absolutely, yes. That's the reason why I enjoyed this select committee meeting. Was a simple reason. You're not going to get bullshit from an MP, just waffle nonsense. So it was very, very interesting. But yeah, good afternoon and welcome to the live stream, and I hope you enjoy it.
Just a general question, if I might ask you. In our current inquiry, we're looking at engineering biology, and we've heard a lot about the difficulties that arise in scaling up projects, not so much in terms of scale-up funding, but just in terms of access to facilities for scale-up and access to lab infrastructure and that kind of thing. And I just wonder if you, from your experience, have any thoughts about what you think government policy should be doing to make that easier? I see both James and Sandy nodding. So, Sandy, do you want to start?
So, my view, so the first step in taking something from the lab into humans to do a phase 1 clinical trial is making a first clinical grade or GMP regulatory compliant batch. For that, you need a facility like the one Kath runs. I think it's extremely important for people to understand, A, the UK doesn't have very many such facilities. I don't know whether it's quite true that the majority of all vaccines which have gone into phase 1 in the UK in the past 15 years have come out of Kath's facility, but a very substantial proportion have come from Kath's facility. And B, those small-scale facilities, which are the first step on the road, they're not hugely expensive. So Kath's annual turnover is about £2.5 million a year to do everything. We have those facilities.
Are they funded by UKRI or?
No, there is no core funding at all. There's no strategic funding. We've never had strategic funding.
No strategic funding. All of my projects are funded on a project-by-project basis. So an academic at the University of Oxford, such as Sandy, will apply for a package of money to do a rabies vaccine, and I will make that, and it will go to trial. And then another grant goes in for another vaccine.
So your funding could just fall off the edge of a cliff.
Wow.
and
yeah, there's no strategic funding, and there's no underwrite from, there's an underwrite from the University of Oxford, but there's no core funding routed through any Oxford scheme.
And it's precarious. There have been points in the last decade where, one individual leaving post could have, led the facility falling over. If we look at the next step along the pathway, and facilities that have the capability to make commercial scale, millions of doses, the UK has those facilities as well. And the facilities at Oxford BioMedica, which exist normally to produce cell and gene therapies, a completely different type of medicine, but they can be repurposed to make vaccines. And there are other facilities as well that we can use for that. But vaccines aren't hugely profitable. There's lots of market failures in there that you probably know about. There's no strategy to pull the facilities that exist into the vaccine space and make sure that teams at places like Oxford BioMedica are actually able to respond and repurpose an emergency if they need to. So the facilities exist, but there's no government strategy I can think of to get the most out of them for the public benefit.
Baroness Neville Rowe, if you wanted to come in.
Noel Jones. This early stage of that you're describing, did you feel safe doing what you were doing, or did you have a strong sense of pretty risky operation, this? What was your sense? What was your level of sense of risk?
Financial safety, or which type of safety?
Well, I mean, there are several, obviously. I mean, money is one. Two, whether it's all going to be a busted flush and not get anywhere and medically not good. What were your concerns?
I think as academics we do at least have permission to fail. So the idea that we might attempt to make a vaccine in early 2020 and it not be a successful vaccine is not really a worry that we have. As scientists, some things you try are not going to work, and we at least would have, we were in early 2020 saying, well, at least we'll have tried, and if it doesn't be successful, hopefully one of the others on the vaccine task force route will be successful. So we always knew that there's a possibility of failure, and as academics, I think that perhaps we have more freedom in that than somebody within a for-profit
that was a big
has.
Conversation within the team at times. I mean, you maybe can appreciate it. We certainly weren't unique in this during the early stage of the pandemic. Is as this exploded, we gave up the rest of our lives basically to make this happen. And we had people who had just moved here from overseas who were feeling very isolated and were working 18-hour days, 7 days a week, sleeping almost at the facility. And we often had conversations about what if it doesn't work. And the upshot was we will do the best science we can do, and we will do it as quickly as we can to the highest possible standard, and we will trust our colleagues in London, overseas, to do exactly the same. And between all of us, something will work. But you don't know it's going to be your one.
If I could chip in, I think there was enormous risk, not patient safety risk, but just huge risk that we would not have been able to deliver what we were very lucky to end up being able to do. And that risk, there was a technical element to it. I think I can probably say, I think it's in your book, Kath, the Kath's team's first effort to make the vaccine failed. Then they had to go back to the beginning, and that cost a number of weeks. And that technical risk was there because we hadn't done it in a rush before, and we hadn't really thought, okay, well, how do we have the backups and risk mitigations to make sure that this does work first time? We weren't prepared, in short. And then it was enormous risk stemming from lack of timely funding. So Adam mentioned a pivotal meeting. A key topic in that meeting was whether we could afford to take the risk of kicking the project that was currently in Kath's facility out delaying the deliverable for the funder of that project, which happened to be Innovate UK, and could we sort of basically backfill if we lost that funding. So basically, we were putting at risk about £50,000 per week that we switched projects. So for want of that £50,000, we could easily, well, I think it's debatable whether we did lose weeks over that. I think possibly we did, but for want of really very small amounts of money, meaningful time could be or was lost. And then at slightly larger scale, when we were negotiating to book the contract manufacturing facilities to make the first large-scale batches, right up to April 2020. So all through March 2020, we had agreement in principle from contract manufacturers that they would back us and they'd make a batch. But we were having phone calls every week, and we were saying, oh, next week there'll be some money. Next week, please don't give away the capacity to somebody else. And that included, importantly, a Dutch manufacturer as well. And we knew they were being approached by other development programs. We did not, so what we needed there was low single-digit millions to book capacity. We did not have that until early April 2020, where after the BIA had a predecessor to the task force that basically connected us to Alex Sharma. We presented a one slide essentially, and there was a one-line email saying you can have 65 million. So we were running on that for a while, but it was very precarious.
No, I think.
Wow, something I'd never thought about. What if they didn't manage to achieve what they needed to achieve? Can you imagine the mess we'd be in now? Wow, imagine the death toll. Wow. Jeez, never really thought about it.
What was the government doing in all of this?
Well, to start with, we didn't really know, we didn't have connections. Who is the government? Who do we speak to? So, there were connections between the clinical development side. My colleague Andy Pollard and Chris Whitty, for example. There were established personal relationships there. There was no established relationship with anybody who might make a rapid decision to invest some money in making a vaccine quickly. Who even has that responsibility in government? So the initial, very first contact we had with government about manufacturing, I sent some emails to Patrick Vallance and Jonathan Van Tam in late February or early March 2020, but actual discussion that made things happen was brokered by Ian McCubbin and the Bioindustry Association's vaccine manufacturing task force, which predated the Kate Bingham VTF, and they had the connections into government and the OLS to make things start to happen.
Did that present when perhaps a framework for action began to develop? Who would
yes.
you say?
I mean, so basically, I didn't know who to speak to, and it was so Ian phoned me. I think the last weekend in March 2020, and he obviously knew how to find the right people. And 8 days later, we were having a call with Alex Sharma.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, so
wanted to come in.
I think you asked about risk, and I think I completely agree with everything that's been said about the sort of risk, personal risk and the institutional risk associated with those early decisions that were taken at their own volition by individuals at University of Oxford. I think that's absolutely vital, and that sort of step to get things moving bought time. Personally, Oxford BioMedica was and still is a listed company with a primary duty to shareholders. So the conversations that I was having with my colleagues in the exec team and with the board were more about what's the risk to the organisation. A bit of background, OXB had made a decision that I'd driven back in 2017, 2018 to expand our manufacturing and development capabilities, and by sheer chance, so unrelated to the COVID pandemic, we had taken control of a commissioned, newly built facility in Oxford in the final quarter of 2019. And we were in the process of planning a steady, gentle, slow, if that's not the right word, bringing that capacity online through the course of 2020 and 2021. That was the plan. So we just happened to have a facility that was principally designed to manufacture viral vectors, our core business being viral vector manufacturing. So whilst we didn't have any organisational experience of working with adenovirus, virus-based vectors, we knew a lot about how to make viral vectors safely in a clean room environment and also do the development work around that. Going back to the risk, obviously, my challenge was we need some money to be able to offset some of the work that had already been committed to with clients. So as a company, we made a commitment to all of our existing clients who were working in very meaningful, development of cancer therapies and things like that, that we wouldn't delay any of their work unless we had to. But our plan was to keep all of that work on track. But in addition to that, start building up our capabilities to support what was initially the consortium's plan to manufacture. That plan went from initially 200 litre scale to very quickly, within a few weeks, we're going to have to do it at a larger scale. So, as you can probably imagine, my challenge was my team needs to be able to operate, to do the development work that was required by that group, and we need to start putting in place the machinery, physical equipment, etc., to be able to be in a position to manufacture later that year. And so our concept was, I was actually given a monetary figure, I will not tell you what it is today, but it was a reasonably substantial amount where the company would say, go away, spend that, don't go over that amount. In the meantime, we have to hope for funding. I was talking, like Sandy, to people like Ian McCubbin to try and encourage some tangible threads of funding. We had our own, as a company, links through IUK, and we had several conversations there. Another sort of fortuitous thing that had happened is I'd earlier in Q4 2019, had started conversations with what was beginning to be the Vaccines Manufacturing Innovation Centre, VMIC. So I knew the CEO there, Matthew Duchars, and we were trying to build a collaborative partnership with VMIC because it's a local organisation in an adjacent field, makes sense. That discussion changed through the course of early 2020 into what can we use this relationship for. And actually, I think one of the things the government did was find a way of using the VMIC organisation as a way of sort of initial funding some of the work that we needed to do. And also, for instance, they purchased some equipment that we needed. So the equipment was paid for by VMIC. We had an agreement I signed in June of 2020 that was, we'll use that equipment and we have an option to buy it. We did later buy that equipment, so essentially it was a loan. But it gave us that credible track record and momentum that we needed to build up what was planned to be, by that stage, 3,000 litre scale production facilities that you probably all know what happened. We ended up making over 100 million doses in Oxford, in that facility. But there's an alternative universe where that facility didn't exist. And organisations like OXB who've got that sort of core capabilities, there aren't that many of them in the UK. I think ours is still the biggest facility in the UK of that type. So it's worth this committee thinking about how do we make sure that there is an ongoing mechanism to help that kind of thing be there when it's needed.
Yeah.
It was when you think about what were the bits that were lucky, that is probably what James has just talked about is the single most lucky bit, was that capacity was available. The odds of something like that being there next time are very, very low.
Wow, I have to say, yeah, I totally get where you come from, Dom. I wonder why I have no trust anymore. What's being done needs some justice and serious looking at it. It's for profits. It's for profit, not saving lives. Because it does seem to me that for these people to get the funding, you do get that air of, well, what do I get out of it? What's in it for me if I give you the funding? That's what it sounds like to me. What do you guys think? Yeah, I had hello, but anyway, hello, Dom, and hello, Phil, and good afternoon, and hope you're both well. I had the vaccines. I was guilt-tripped into it, thinking it would save the boomers. Then I had a TIA. Sorry, I couldn't quite read them. My pins are not the best. And about a year on, I'm still waiting to be seen in hospital. I'm sorry to hear that, my friend. That's it's not ideal, is it? It's I feel sorry for us. I do, management are money people, not medical professionals. Yeah, you're right, Dom. Yeah, and but like what he says there, talking about luck. Can imagine how I don't want if we have another pandemic to be in a situation where for this to work, I don't want to be hoping for luck. Do you? That's scary.
And without it, I don't know that we would have delivered anywhere near what we were able to deliver.
And just the reason so the facility will still be there. It's still there. It's busier now than it was at the beginning of 2020, obviously, which is exactly what the business needs. You don't need an empty facility. That's not good. So conceptually, encouraging organisations to maintain that sort of warm capacity, capability, competencies. These are, I mean, the COVID vaccine manufacturing world was littered with examples of organisations trying to do something they'd never done before. Quite a few organisations trying to make a viral vector that they hadn't done it before. There were mistakes made and errors made. So you need organisations that are in the right technical competency sort of space to be able to do that. And obviously, there are multiple technologies. We're talking primarily here about viral vector technologies, but there are others out there that need to be supported.
So as a listed company, so without the academic freedoms that your colleagues had, how on earth did you manage to do it?
So I mean, ill-advisedly went skiing in February 2020. I remember a very distinct conversation with my then boss that week. He'd already started to show signs of support. And I have to say, it didn't take me, I think I may have given you the impression it took me a long time to get that support from my colleagues. It didn't. It took 2 to 3 weeks. Within that 2 to 3 week period, I was given that budget I mentioned earlier to get the early stage stuff done and start putting in place the building blocks that we knew would be needed later that year if this vaccine candidate was remotely useful. I mean, at that stage, obviously, it might have failed. We had no idea. One of the conversations that the board had was, I think somebody's already mentioned it, vaccines are a notorious challenging area for-profit organisations, simply because a lot of vaccine sort of projects are negotiated with governments rather than commercial organisations, and governments can and sometimes do change their mind quite quickly, which is not helpful for a commercial organisation. So there was all that discussion, but at the same time, I think, and I speak here as Oxford BioMedica former leader, but also I think the general consensus amongst my colleagues at the BIA Manufacturing Advisory Committee, for instance, was that everyone wanted to do something helpful, and suddenly you had a real common need, and enough people thinking, right, we need to do something that was going to make a meaningful difference.
Did you have support from your institutional shareholders to take that risk?
We didn't ask for support at that stage from our shareholders, primarily because there wasn't a forum to do that. It wasn't the AGM or anything like that. And also, we were committing to a sum of money that was within my personal budgetary remit within the organisation. So obviously, had it gone really badly wrong and we hadn't have had any future funding, which, by the way, our hope was some commercial organisation would sign some kind of contract, and we.
Sorry about it, but I just want to say hello. That's God's last sis is my daughter. And just drop in and before she does her Tai Chi lesson for later on, so say hello to my lovely daughter. And yeah, I totally agree about Don what you talk about. Boeing, yes, it always seems to be the same, see how much corners you can cut, and when really you shouldn't really cut corners on health and safety and stuff like that. So totally agree, my friend.
We would be signing the contract with that commercial organisation. So in Oxford BioMedica's world, the fact that AstraZeneca joined in, sort of novated over a lot of agreements and accepted the sort of responsibility for driving the plan, actually was quite positive news for a company like Oxford BioMedica, primarily because we knew who we were dealing with, And quite quickly, I mean, it's public. We signed a contract with AZ very, very shortly after the University of Oxford did.
And if I might chip in on that, a further enormous risk was that we could have ended up with the wrong large pharma partner. So I explained that we did manage to get a certain way without having a large pharma partner, and personally I think that the fact we were working with small entrepreneurial organisations was actually quite important for our ability to move quickly. But ultimately, to do a global rollout, you needed a big pharma partner. We spoke to a number before or at the same time as AZ. I don't need to name names, but at least one, in my view, would have been a disaster because they just didn't share the same vision that we had, which was that impact for this vaccine was going to come through making a very large amount of it quickly, and that work needed to start a long time before we knew whether the vaccine was going to work. And given the technical details about how this is made, it wasn't going to be possible to do just on one site for global scale. So James's site was able to fulfill UK needs, but to have impact in the world, ultimately about 3 billion doses were made. Over half of those were made by the Serum Institute of India. So we were working with them before we were working with AZ. It was enormously important for global impact of the product that we were able to find a partner that not only was willing to keep going with this broad strategy of multiple sites, but in particular was willing to work with this particular Indian company, which is the biggest vaccine manufacturing company in the world by number of doses, but is an unusual organisation, and I don't think every large pharma would have done that. There was a lack of thought through route for basically making sure that a big pharma would deliver what we needed.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Baroness Young.
Hello. I'll just give you a quick hello there. Hello there, Mad Monk, and yes, Sean Nillibud. You will be surprised. My son's name for his YouTube channel is God's Last Gift. And one thing you can always say about my son, as you can see with the title, he's incredibly humble. But hello, Mad Monk. No worries, don't worry about it, my friend, and your family comes first, doesn't it? And hello, Johan. It is incredibly interesting. Is very interesting, and what I have to say about what the European Union did is also very, very eye-opening. But yeah, don't worry about it, Mad Monk.
Yes, I mean, I want to focus on whether some of the initiatives that were set up during the pandemic were the right ones, and what's happened to them since. I mean, particularly VMIC, which you mentioned. I mean, the aim was not only to get through the pandemic and produce the vaccines, but also to set ourselves up as a vaccine provider of the future. Who wants to tell us the inside story of what happened to VMIC? Was it a good idea? Why was it scrapped? And who made the decision?
Happy to.
We're all telling you.
Body language.
Yes, it was a good idea. The idea in 2017 that the government should invest about £60 million in a facility to make vaccines in a hurry, in an emergency, that was a good idea, and it was somewhat ahead of its time. Within the pandemic, the facility wasn't ready yet. Some of the employees played important roles, but the facility itself didn't. And as you know, it got repurposed to become a commercial scale, a much larger scale facility with further investment of money from the Vaccines Task Force. That facility, in the end, proved not to make any doses and is now mothballed. In my view, that investment in the facility did make sense as part of the Vaccines Task Force's portfolio of projects. They were placing multiple bets and they needed a couple of them to come off, and it's sensible, in my view, to invest in that in early 2020. I think from the pandemic, we've learned that, well, yes, it is very important for government to invest in innovative and rapid response vaccine manufacturing capability, and VMIC was a way of doing that. But I think we do now, when I say we, I've had a series of conversations with colleagues from Innovate UK Bioindustry Association, former members of the Vaccines Task Force, about, well, how could we achieve those objectives that VMIC had, but possibly do it better now? I think we do now know how we could do better, and in my view, that is not by building new bricks and mortar facilities. As I said earlier, I think the facilities exist. It's instead by having something like a peacetime vaccines task force that invests, put in place the contracts for emergency response, and decides over time, well, we're going to invest in this platform, that platform, and that platform, a similar portfolio approach, and pulls that capability that's used to make other sorts of medicines in to serve the UK public for emergency vaccine response. We know now what, if you look around the world, other countries have learned the lesson. So I think in early 2020, we were not as far forward as we could have been, but we were somewhat ahead of the rest of the world. And perhaps it appears from where we're sitting that maybe government and the public have perhaps concluded that the UK's can do this, and we don't need to improve our systems, whereas other countries around the world, notably the EU, have looked and thought, well, maybe things didn't go so well. What preparations can we put in place? And the EU has a scheme called FAB, F-A-B. They have placed contracts, a budget 160 million euros a year, with 4 contract manufacturing organisations to provide capability, not just for mRNA, which is obviously important, but also other types of vaccine, viral vector-based and protein. So they have a portfolio approach, and those contracts basically ensure that those facilities are ready, they're warm lit, they're stocked, they're staffed, they have the processes to produce up to 325 million batches of vaccine in a year when the EU says so. And Germany, I believe, has basically done exactly the same or a very similar thing, but within Germany. So they have domestic capability. And if you speak to the contract manufacturers, it's a detailed piece of work they've done. So they really could tomorrow press go and make a batch of our vaccine more quickly probably than we could do it in the UK. And
wow, yeah, tells you everything you need to know. And yeah, I just want to say hello to Sir Larry the cat. Can I ask, as after the Sir Keir and probably Ed Davey had an all-night party celebrating the last 2 candidates for the Conservative Party being announced, have they woken up and how's their hangover? And I hope they've not pissed all over the walls and vomited all over the carpets and done dodgy stuffs in the cupboard as well, just wondering, because I can imagine they'll have celebrated really well.
The UK has absolutely nothing comparable.
Is there a governing mind? Who's in charge at the moment, and who was in charge? Who actually made the decision about VMIC going?
About VMIC being sold?
Yeah.
Pass. I mean, the sort of gossipy version I've heard is that basically Treasury got its hands on the remnants of the vaccine task force's investments. I was part of an informal working group with the other organisations, representatives of the other organisations I mentioned, and we basically made a pitch through Innovate UK that not even the whole proceeds of selling the facility, but just the amount of money that had been invested pre-pandemic, about 70 million, could be retained for use in the field to do something like I described, a peacetime VTF and reserve capacity and so on, and that proposal sank without trace.
So Comparative other side of this is the 10-year strategic partnership with Moderna. Do you think government thinks that's a substitute?
I'm worried they do.
Yeah. I mean, do you know what that contract gives us? I mean, we were a little bit concerned when we were speaking in advance of this session that, you know, we're a bit narrow. We've got representation of Oxford basically here, so we have tried to speak to colleagues with broader understanding of the bigger picture of what's going on. I don't know, and I haven't been able to establish whether the contract with Moderna extends beyond batches of basically a COVID vaccine and a flu vaccine, respiratory viruses, to, for example, you know, think about the scenario where there's some obscure Ebola-like virus on the other side of the world. It's not yet clear whether it's an emergency or not. UK government, well, if there was somebody in UK government to take the decision that we should make a vaccine against it, and I don't know that there is, does that contract require Moderna to make a batch quickly when UK government says so? I've no idea. So there may be an actual problem with what's in the contract. There's certainly a problem with transparency about what's in the contract.
Does anybody else want to finger decision makers in this, either in the past?
Now you say it that way. So I think I'd like to take it. So VMIC, the concept, as Sandy said, was thought about. It was pushed for by the Medicines Manufacturing Industry Partnership, secured £66 million. The clue's in the name. It was supposed to be vaccines manufacturing innovation, and it was supposed to be about building that bridge between the academic world and the industrial world to try and accelerate new technologies, new capabilities, and so on. I think during the pandemic, the design of the facility and the remit of the organisation changed substantially from that innovation focus, early stage, small scale, definitely wasn't going to be commercial scale manufacturing, to the number one priority being fill finish capability, which is, as a GMP expert, the single most difficult thing to achieve from a standing start, which is a field at the start of the pandemic. In my personal opinion, there was no way that any competent organisation, even a very heavily staffed organisation, which VMIC wasn't, could have achieved that build in that time frame and delivered dose. So I think it's important to say that I don't personally believe that VMIC as an organisation did anything wrong. They were encouraged to change their remit. I think that decision may have been okay as long as it didn't delete the original remit, which is the innovation, that bridge, that capability building concept that would have been a useful legacy. So I think inadvertently, I think I've heard words used, the industry stepped up and showed that we don't have a market failure in the UK for this problem. Therefore, we don't need to invest in government support for such capabilities, which I think is too big of a jump to make. Oxford BioMedica is one of a few organisations that have relevant competencies, and another organisation, something like VMIC, something like a peacetime vaccines task force, that has the duty to coordinate and create that joined up thinking, is missing. And closing that concept off, I think, was a mistake, personally.
Do you know, this type of question, it kind of reminded me, you know, within this government, I got the feeling that they just think they're invincible, you know. It's like wanting to do away with as if we're invincible. It's that English exceptionalism that, from what I'm gathering here, where they didn't want to do it, and it seemed as though they weren't interested. You know, nothing can help. Nothing can do as good as we're British. Very interesting. But yes, Larry the cat. Nah, Sir Beer just had a few pims. Yeah, I thought. And Ed David got rat-arsed and wanted to go water skiing, so he didn't want to go bungee jumping. Go down. For Liberal Democrats! For Liberal Democrats! For Liberal Democrats! He didn't want to do that. Yeah. That's a great point, Simon says. Are we getting to invade the Netherlands soon? Yeah. Spafford Johnson, what an idiot. Yeah. None of this is straightforward. There's a lot to unpack. You're not wrong. Absolutely. Not wrong. Not wrong, Billy Kershaw. But it's very, very interesting. And I thought the Germany bit, if this happens again, from day one, they can get going. Look, can imagine the mess we'd be in.
In 2020, we were, as a country, at the front of the queue in many ways. Now, I'm not sure we're not right near the back of it. And the reason is we've talked about, the US obviously is very strong in this area. We've talked about what the EU, Germany and other high-income countries are rolling out. But organisations like CEPI and others, and I should mention Sandy, Kath and I do get funding through CEPI. They do a lot of work on improving capacity, but it's not there to improve capacity for the UK, it's in low and middle income countries, right? So there are big programs to improve manufacturing capacity in almost every other part of the world at the moment.
Yeah.
But there's very, very little here that would allow us to pivot quickly. And the capacity is there. There's just not quite the pathway at the moment.
And where you are on the queue matters. Because we were early in our development, we sort of got first dibs on the finite global supply of all the tedious things like bioreactor bags and filters and so on that you need to make very large quantities of vaccine. Now, well, we don't, nowhere in the UK, to my knowledge, is holding stocks of them. Germany's got contracts they've got contracts with the suppliers already that they would get them in an emergency.
Move on to Lord Drayson and then Lord Borwick. It's very interesting, but lots of people want to come in with questions.
Yeah. During this period, am I right that the Office for Life Sciences was the main vehicle for the connection between the Vaccine Task Force and the machinery of government?
I believe so.
Yep.
Who was responsible for the Office for Life Sciences within the machinery of government?
As in, who's the director?
No. Who's the minister?
It's it's a cross department between Department of Health and what's now DSIT.
So who would have made the argument against the Treasury decision? If your rumour is correct, it was a Treasury. No, there's no market failure. We can cut this. Who was the minister that should have made the argument? This is a mistake.
I believe it would have sat with George Freeman at that time.
Okay.
And I think if you were to speak to, for example, Robin Shattuck, who was the chair of VMIC, I think you might find that he had let his feelings be known.
Thanks.
Very interesting.
Lord Borwick.
We're not doing the first half of 3 first.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Baroness Northover.
This follows on from what you've just been saying, in fact. So the question is, the UK's 2023 Biological Security Strategy set out various initiatives that were intended to secure the UK against future pandemics, including targets to improve vaccine and therapeutics manufacturing. How well is this policy progressing? I think we've got some of the answers there. And do you feel that the UK is on course to be ready for the next pandemic? What would happen if a novel pandemic threat emerged tomorrow?
I think we know that answer, don't we? No, we don't sound as though we're ready. And quite right, Billy Kershaw. The elephant is in the room, isn't it? And it's the EU. Quite right.
So we've, I think, personal disclosure. I knew of the strategy. I didn't know very much about it. I still don't.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately. So there is some high-level concepts and strategic aspects to the plan. How much of that has actually turned into action and budget and progress, I'm afraid I can't say. I think we have, and as Sandy said, we consciously know that we're a relatively narrow group of people here with specific links to Oxford, so we have reached out and asked the opinion of the BIA and other organisations, and I think the general consensus is conceptually it's a great idea as a strategy. I think the committee has been convened and met on at least one occasion that we know about, but the remit seems to be quite narrowly focused on, for instance, sequence security, which is an interesting concept, but what we're talking about here is about readiness for a potential pandemic, whether the cause of that pandemic is a virus that's escaped from a lab or has been generated artificially, or more likely it's a pandemic of an already naturally occurring virus. So I think we haven't seen, or at least I haven't seen, any sort of tangible action that is helping build the UK's capability around that yet.
And
I mean,
we
see pandemic threats emerging all the time. There's an ongoing Marburg outbreak in Rwanda currently, and Oxford has responded to that. We had a vaccine in early phase, and we will be getting manufacturing done through a different route, but not in the UK. So if we had a capacity to keep things warm, there would be vaccines we could make for emergency scenarios. The money wouldn't be wasted if we had a peacetime vaccine task force. You would keep them warm by making useful things that would go out into the world and have useful events. So we know what we should do, but we don't currently do that in the UK.
And we discussed this beforehand as a group, and what James said about the strategy, I think, applies for all of us.
None of you are really...
No, no one's reached out on what should we do with vaccines under this strategy to us or our peers that we know of. There's
not even consulted.
Yeah, nothing at all. Like not even an email or a phone call, nothing.
And we looked at the strategy, and the front page highlights there's something called a biothreats radar. Fine, a minister for biosecurity. I don't think that exists. You may know a leadership council. As James said, we did a little bit of homework. Our understanding is that the remit of that is currently, or what they're actually doing, is very narrow and does not cover emergency vaccine manufacturing and regular exercises, which sounds like a great idea. If you were really serious about the UK being able to make a new vaccine in a hurry, rather like an army has exercises or a fire brigade does, you're trying to prepare for something you hope might not happen, but you would definitely have a drill each year to make sure you could do it.
And that's what the EU's doing.
And if you wanted to have capability that was any broader than just mRNA and Moderna, and as I said, I don't know whether Moderna are required to do that sort of drill, but if you wanted to have eggs in any other baskets other than the Moderna basket, I think we in Oxford would be involved, and we haven't heard anything about it. So there's mention of the 100-day mission to make vaccines in response to a new pathogen within 100 days. CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Initiative, certainly has a coherent, they're open to proposals. They're funding people, including ourselves, to develop that capability for global level, but their remit is not the UK. There seems to be, I am not aware of any joined-up plan from government to make sure that, either in advance to actually prepare and make sure that we would have the capability to respond in 100 days, and it's technically certainly possible. It just requires some preparation and a modest investment ahead of time, I would say, or to actually know what's going to happen on day one. What is the process that we would follow in that emergency?
If Marburg gets out of hand tomorrow, we are not in a great position to respond to it.
Well,
the EU will
we have
respond.
Patrick Vallance in 2 weeks' time, so we will pass on your questions and comments to him. Baroness Neville Jones, did you want to come in very quickly?
I have to say, that is scary, isn't it? And I absolutely, totally agree, man. Monk. The best way to combat a future pandemic is simple. One, we are an island. Two, don't let anybody in after a lockdown. Three, proper isolation facilities. And four, don't give millions of pounds to your buddies. Absolutely, don't treat it as an opportunity to make money out of it. Good afternoon, Stephen Bank here. Yeah, basically, well, I was going to start one Stephen Bankier, but then I had technology problems. I start with the best intentions, and then fate farts in my face. So, but yeah, it was. I'd say up for about 1 o'clock, maybe about an hour or so before. I think it was about 12ish, and because I just thought, because I was going to do this yesterday, but I had other things that I needed to do, and basically I didn't have, so I thought I'll do it today. But yeah, totally agree. But anyway, good afternoon and thanks for joining us. And didn't that bloke with the short pants and big boots have shares in Moderna? With short pants and big boots. Oh yeah, I wonder who you mean, said Larry. You don't mean titch your short pants? Very possible. But yeah, that is incredibly scary. We're not in a good place. Oh dear, this is scary. But I told you it was really, really interesting. But like, as I say, Stephen back, I'll probably do a few more of these sort of stuff, because there's some select committee meetings that are fascinating, but they're not going to do well in a video. So you might as well just do it live and save all the hard work on doing a video that is not going to be watched but a lot. So, but fascinating doing it in a live stream.
In relation to what you just said, I think this biosecurity strategy has a very strong background in national security. Would I be right in thinking that the emphasis is on preventing bad things happening rather than good things flourishing?
Seemingly.
I mean, I think it's to do with preventing pathogens and biological warfare.
I think the analogy with defence, I think, is quite an important one. This is how.
That's where I think the bureaucratic energy is gone.
How do we prepare for an emergency that might never happen? Markets, pharma companies left their own devices are not very good at doing that.
But this is sort of worries about things like China and
Yes, so
I think it's one we'll take up with Patrick Vallance and explore a bit further with him, because I think you've given us some really interesting input for that. Could we move on to Lord Borwick?
There was a lot of talk about the work being done in Wuhan before the COVID appeared, the gain of function research that was doing. Is that gain of function research being done now in Wuhan, and is it being done by other countries, as far as we know?
Don't know.
Yeah, we don't know what happens in Wuhan, sort of thing. We don't have a way of having oversight of that. Gain of function research definitely happens, and there's good scientific justification for it. There was a reasonable controversy about this in sort of 2014, 2015 around bird flu, swine flu, and studies into which mutations would make those flu viruses spread better or be more dangerous to people. And there was a lot of umming and ahhing about whether that should be published. So research like that definitely does happen, but with a purpose of informing us to allow us to prepare better, like what sort of flu vaccines would we need to combat a more dangerous flu virus. There's a very good justification for it. But what's happening in other countries that we don't have good contact with is hard for us to judge, and I think it'd be hard for almost anyone to judge.
Should we be worried about?
Sorry about it, but I just want to say, off to work, Ruth. No worries. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining, and have a good day. And also, quite agree, Mad Monk. Also, I do want to get in contact with you and Alice, because I'll probably need some, what you call them, for the streams, moderators. And I know you said you'd do it. And I will get in contact with you whenever I get a chance. Because I know I'll definitely need some. So, yeah, totally agree. Yeah, it probably is a better idea of doing these live streams. But anyway, let's get back to the experts.
About somebody bad making something bad? Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
It's entirely technically possible. I think it's probably not possible to, at global level, get assurance that nobody's going to do it.
You can get some mitigation. There can be regulation in national agreements which will decrease the risk somewhat. I think during your engineering biology sessions there's been some discussion of that in other areas, and that's all very good, but you'll never get it to zero. And so what's the plan if something goes wrong? As James said, whether it's natural or whether it's a bad actor, state or non-state. And vaccines and other things, therapeutics, a part of the response to that and doing that as quickly as possible. And we, in my view, don't want to be in a situation where it takes us 6 months to decide that we need to do something. Last time we decided in less than 6 weeks. And I don't want us going backwards.
I think, if I may, just that ability to respond, you can't build that capability from nothing. So you need established organisations that are already operating in a regulatory environment that are making relevant stuff. It doesn't have to be vaccines all the time, but that for me is the thing that is easily the distraction. Let's build a government-funded organisation. But then what do you get them to do? And then you'll start looking at whether it makes sense from a financial perspective, and then you realise a few years later and you change your plan and nothing happens. So build upon the existing infrastructure across academia, across industry, from my perspective is by far the strongest sort of response, because then you've got lots of eggs in lots of baskets.
If I could add also, Robin Shattuck and I, when we were considering, this pitch to retain the VMIC funding, we were conscious of the need to explain to government why having all the eggs in the mRNA basket was not a very safe idea. If I had to pick one basket, probably I'd go for mRNA too. But we sat and we considered, there are some really important things that mRNA cannot do. And the scenario of a multi-resistant bacterium, mRNA, you can't make bacterial polysaccharides with mRNA. So we could well not be able to respond to that sort of situation.
Thank you. Can we move on to Baroness Neuberger?
And you've answered a lot of what I was going to ask you. So let's give you a clean slate and you can design what we need in the UK. Yeah, you're looking forward to this. So yeah, we don't have much power, but anyway. So we're going to have clearly a peacetime vaccine task force. You seem to be agreed on that. So that would be something, if you like, that would be take an overview of what we need for future pandemics. Okay, what else do we need to strategically maintain in the UK, as it were, underneath that task force?
So I'll start at the front end, because that's my end. We need to be supporting creative, innovative, academic manufacturing and idea generation. You need to know which kind of vaccines you're going to make. So we need to be supporting the scientists, not only in our universities, but that can be small biotech at the front end, because we've got to know what vaccines are going to be, these new types of vaccines that are going to be able to combat potentially a multi-drug resistant bacteria. We need innovation at the front end. We need then the ability to demonstrate that they work in people. So we need effective phase 1 clinical trials, all happening in peacetime, because that's your foundation on which you then pick the one that you're going to go up to. And we need kept warm manufacturing capability for sufficient doses for the UK population.
Which you said, yeah. Okay, but in order to, if you like, keep that academic and the skills base, how do you make sure there are enough people coming in who want to do that work? How do you support them, etc.? You're designing this system.
This is a huge ongoing question. Yeah?
There are things already. So VaxHub is a good example.
So we have some funding from EPSRC, from the UKRI foundations to support academic funding for vaccine development. There's not very many of them. That's low tens of digits of millions over a 7-year period. It's not large amounts of funding. Maintaining this creative, innovative university infrastructure is hugely important. So keeping that funding coming through UKRI for grants for academics to do innovative work. It's really important. But then
Kath maybe won't quite say it, so I'll say it, is I think it's very odd that the CBF hasn't had
that's my facility.
Great funding. Her facility, where so many of these vaccines are manufactured, it's a small facility with one clean room suite, trying to expand it to future-proof it, to allow it to have greater capacity. And that's been something we've been talking about for a decade. And wow. It's so pivotal to without the CBF, there was no Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine at all.
If I could sort of go at something a completely different end of this debate, I think, everyone thought in 2020, 21, never again. Surely memories can't be so short that we won't figure out how to do this again. But memories, it seems, are quite short. And there's clearly an enormous long-termism problem here, and we all know that democratic governments are not terribly good at investing for the long term in things that might never happen. So I think there needs to be some serious thought about how to essentially impose cost on a government that neglects this, and there needs to be some thought about how to put in place the mechanisms to give this issue greater prominence in public and governmental discussion, and to make really clear who is accountable, who is responsible for this. I mentioned earlier that I mentioned two things. One, is there a biosecurity minister or not? Seems like a good idea. There probably should be. I don't know if it needs to be a dedicated individual, but this is a cross-departmental issue. The responsibility for this 100-day response needs to clearly sit with a named minister, in my mind. We were lucky that we had Patrick Vallance as the CSA. We might have a nuclear physicist in future. There needs to be a named, identifiable individual who is, I don't know what you call them, the chief 100-day officer or the chief biosecurity officer, chief pharma officer. There needs to be a specialist, non-minister, who's responsible for this. And in my view, there perhaps needs to be something that is a little bit at arm's length from government and is a reporting mechanism, as essentially something like an annual report. What is the state of the UK's preparedness in this? Are we actually in a good place? Or
could
not?
That sit under the chief scientific and chief medical officer together, or something like that?
I don't know whether you think they're sufficiently independent to be able to say unpleasant things. So it could sit perhaps with this peacetime vaccines task force, or there's wider issues about scientific advice from the COVID inquiry.
You've talked about the pitch that you made, Professor Douglas, and so I'm going to leave that to one side. But you've also talked about not depending entirely on mRNA, and I think that's really important. What other technologies should we be supporting? Would you say we should be part? We're obviously not in the EU, but should we be part of something like the EU effort that they're making? Should we be doing something? Should we model ourselves on Germany? Should there be something like that, or should we do it entirely ourselves? How do we do that?
Maybe she read your mind, Simon says, because yes, I think you two are both on the same wavelength, judging by what you've just written in the chat, my friend.
So the EU scheme that I mentioned secures capacity to make 3 different types of vaccine: mRNA, viral vectors like the Oxford vaccine. And there's a particular problem with them in that the world has rightly or wrongly concluded that they're not the way forward. So there aren't companies doing them at the moment. It sort of falls to us, really. And protein vaccines like the Novavax vaccine. So they have a reasonable portfolio, in my view, 3 different approaches. Between those, I would be quite confident that if a vaccine could be made against a viral threat, they would be able to make it.
Your bacterium?
I would add development of a bacterial platform capability if I was able to. Could we buy into the EU system? Well, that would seem to me to solve the problem if we could. But if not, then in my view, we need to replicate something quite like it.
So do something like what Germany's doing or whatever.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Can we move on to Lord Lucas to talk about funding?
Yes, we've covered a fair bit of this already in one way or another. But is there anything else you would like to say about how what you would like to do ought to be funded? It's a perennial problem in government.
Yeah, money's good. Throw money at it. I think there's a lot. One of the things I would be cautious of, or encourage, maybe is the way to put it, is if there was a committee like this that was talked about, it would be best if it was set up so that it could make relatively low cost, so relatively low budgetary cost, go-no-go decisions quite early on, with the acceptance that most of those will be overreactions. If you're not responding quickly, and find out you didn't need to respond 9 times out of 10, you're responding too slowly. So that would be the one thing I would say. I would like the funding through that and the way it uses its funding to be able to go, let's start to make a batch against Marburg or Ebola or whatever it is that's just beginning to, Mpox, whatever's emerging at the moment, and accept that a lot of the time we won't actually end up needing or using that. But it becomes an exercise anyway in making sure the capability is there. That's the thing I'd add to what's already been discussed.
And often those would go into stockpiles or would have uses elsewhere. Just because it doesn't become a pandemic doesn't mean it's not a local problem. You don't lose that material, you gain it in expertise and capabilities, but also you gain that in soft power if you're delivering vaccines to where there's an outbreak in Rwanda.
I think just to add to that, I think the ability to have organisations that are ready to go, that have the ability to make at scale quickly, having the contracts in place, having the agreements in place, some of that stuff takes a long time. It's easy to do in peacetime. It's difficult to do when you're on your back foot. So,
and one of the central tenets of how the Oxford program started and what AstraZeneca took over was that distributed manufacturing approach. The sort of, it's not a zero-sum game. We can manufacture some here in the UK, but we can transfer the process to India or South Korea or wherever, and they can make some. And so it's not a zero-sum game most of the time, with the exception of supply chains, in that if your supply chain isn't secure and if there is competition for the bioreactor bags or whatever it is and there aren't enough of them, that becomes an area of difficulty.
And just going back to experience during the pandemic, supply chain, Oxford BioMedica manufactured many batches. It's not publicly disclosed how many, but a lot. And that required a Herculean sort of challenge to be met in terms of material supply, buffers, media, bioreactor bags, having the agreement in place with suppliers, which are often global. So we had the Defence Procurement Act to deal with during the pandemic, which meant that it was actually illegal in the US for multinationals to sell material to us in the UK or anywhere else other than the US if there was a demand in the US. Now, thankfully, most of the larger suppliers managed to find a way of delivering both to the US and to outside of the US, but be mindful of nationalism during that and making sure that the UK is sufficiently well prepared. So having relevant suppliers that are domestic of capabilities that can be pivoted again is probably worth sort of thinking about.
And it's listed in the German and EU approaches as part of what they scope through their committees, through their systems, is they're looking at those supply chains. So it could be that funding to strengthen those chains would be one area where funding could be well used.
Can you link us into the German and EU?
Yeah, I think it'd be quite easy to send to Thomas the information, the links on those.
And you were making a point earlier about fire drill, as it were.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That combined with transparency might perhaps give the rest of us a visibility of the vulnerabilities, which would make us want to fund them.
Absolutely. So, if I mentioned the budget for that EU scheme, that's big scale, 325 million dose per year capability across 3 different platforms. It'd be lovely to have that here, but you could do a lot that would be helpful with a lot less than that. So I think to have capacity to make commercial scale, million dose scale batches of vaccines based on our technology platform with an annual drill to show that it actually works and to make sure that the staff are trained and competent and so on. I think you're talking single-digit millions of pounds per year for that capability to exist. And you're not getting nothing for it. You would get millions of doses per year of a vaccine against a new pathogen, and there's plenty of things out there that the world could do with vaccines against. And there's then a need, as Adam mentioned, as well as that sort of ongoing sustaining funding, there does need to be an emergency pot that's, the rainy day fund that's there, that the trigger gets pulled, okay, there's $1 million tomorrow to actually do this for real. Where the money comes from, I don't know where the proceeds of the VMIC sale have gone. Maybe someone might be able to find them. Other possibilities. So we in Oxford have had a lot of research funding over the years that has come through overseas development aid funding to develop vaccines for things like malaria, but also some of these outbreak pathogens, Ebola and so on. They're entirely reasonable ODA investments. So that's one budget. And if anyone's at all serious about thinking about this as a true national security priority, there's no real connection between this world at the moment and that I know of and the defence world. If government's thinking of increasing spending on defence to some larger percentage, there's a significant amount of money available there, and a very, very small amount of it could make a very big difference.
All I can say is this guy's clearly an expert in his field and knows of what he speaks. I just wish he'd move a bit further away from the microphone. There's a difference between speaking in it and then basically choking on it. Very interesting what he says, but his use of the mic is not very good.
Allowing ministry as a rainy day fund would be a real treasure innovation, and it would have made our response to BSE much quicker if we'd had it.
I'd much love to go.
I'm going to come to Baroness Neville-Jones because I know she has to leave shortly, but I'll come back to you, Baroness Young.
You've said, I think, quite a lot about the partnership that is essential between government and it's really government, academia and industry.
Yep.
And I mean that's a pattern that we're going to see in the development of lots of science and technology in forthcoming years. In all that you've said, is there anything that you see as being a key element which we haven't really talked about, which is an essential element, essential part of a long-term working between government and things like the health sciences, but particularly vaccines, given particularly that vaccines, this isn't a great money-making area for industry. So how does one maintain the necessary capabilities, when there isn't actually a pandemic going?
My personal view is that it's extremely important to think about the role, obviously I'm biased, but the academics can play in this, because what we do in Oxford is a little bit like what small biotech companies do, in that we do the early phase of vaccine development, the first clinical trials for a new product and so on. And in industry, that's often done by small biotech companies that are quite short-lived, and then they're making a single product, and then they get taken over into a bigger company if they're successful. Whereas we in Oxford had the, I think, unusual experience that we were trying to make vaccines for very difficult diseases, and we had that capability and experience that usually sits in small, short-lived organisations, in an organisation with a very long institutional memory. So that meant we had individuals with quite broad experience, and an organisation where we collaborate. Well, that's what we do. There's not a lot of barrier to me going and picking up the phone to Kath and doing a new project with her. Whereas if you contrast that to Big Pharma, and as I said, I think AZ did a fantastic job. They've not had enough credit. They don't have the credit they deserve for what they did, and Big Pharma clearly has a central role in global scale.
There has to be a transition at
some point. There has to be a transition.
Yeah.
But if you look at how Big Pharma vaccine companies around the world did in the pandemic, GSK, Sanofi, Merck, they all make a lot of vaccines. None of them made a COVID vaccine. Pfizer did, but with a small partner. I think it's quite important to understand that Big Pharma is institutionally not very good at moving fast. So government needs to foster the cooperation between different sorts of organisation in this.
And that sort of scale up bit. They need to be conscious of where the money needs to go in, presumably. So, in the light of experience, where, this was a success story, but there's a rather nasty sort of aftertaste that's been left by what's happened subsequently. And so, are you concerned that the way in which the companies may regard themselves as having been a bit burned, that cooperation cooperation wouldn't be forthcoming next time round? I mean, has it left a legacy which is negative, which government needs to do something about?
To a degree, it has. Yeah. So that said, I think the UK is blessed to have a really quite a close-knit bioindustry association network of organisations which is, behind that you have individuals who care about this sort of thing. That's still there. So I'd like to think that people would make those at personal risk decisions again. I think again, I'm not speaking for OXB, but I can talk about the experience that, I was at OXB when the decision by central government to stop ordering AZ vaccine was made. That was a very sudden decision. My personal view was it was driven to an extent, at least, by public sentiment and some of the other geopolitical stuff that was going on in the background, which is unfortunate. As a scientist, you should make scientifically based decisions, and wouldn't it be better to sort of invest in understanding some of the challenges that were faced with the particular platforms? All of them had some challenges, and try to solve them by funding that work. And then for a commercial organisation, having a very, very sudden, OXB told shareholders at the beginning, or relatively early on in the pandemic, that we were going to do this work. OXB did not make the decision that AZ did, which was, we're doing this not for profit, because as a small company, OXB couldn't make that decision. That wouldn't have been acceptable to the shareholders. So some money was made. Probably a little bit more money than was anticipated was made, because we ended up being one of the European largest manufacturers, if not the largest manufacturer in Europe. So the sudden stopping of revenues was a big problem that leadership had to then deal with. And we had to make adjustments. You probably are aware that the company has resized relatively recently. We probably could have made that choice earlier if we had worried more about that sort of thing. That my philosophy was, we're a company, we're trying to build this competency, these capabilities, and we can build upon that. You feel a little bit burnt afterwards. And I'm sure, and I know other organisations, it's public about Valneva and other companies that have had similar challenges. Wockhardt had to make some people redundant. They made choices very early on post-pandemic.
Would it be valuable for a new government to have a proper wash-up with you?
Yep, very, very much so. Yeah. I think you can learn a lot from what was done, and I think it could have been mitigated. And things go up and down, right? Demand goes up and down, absolutely. And I fully, and I'm sure the current leadership would agree that this is something that the company has a duty to deal with. But ultimately, there are ways of making it a softer landing for the company that essentially took on an enormous amount of risk early on.
I'd just like to highlight the importance of goodwill in making things happen fast. So it's not really possible to contractually enforce people working flat out 24/7, and so for this, for a future emergency response to happen as quickly as it could, we need organisations, companies, to want to do it and to know that the significant risks that they're taking on, not just financial but reputational as well, are going to be covered.
Yeah, totally agree. God's last sis, yeah. You must love the mic. A little bit too much, a little bit too close. Back off. Yeah, like Mad Monks here. How about a government-owned pharmaceutical facility making our own drugs at cost prices, but ready to change to make new vaccines without the outrageous costs from private companies? Yes, quite right, Steve Banker. That'd probably be a little bit too sensible. And Simon says, yes, socialism, oh dear. But yes, I like that. I like your thinking. Simon says, can we give Nigel every disease and monitor him? Yeah, who's going to be giving him the job to be stood there looking at him for that long? Oh dear, no. I'm not sure how even I would fancy that. I know I do watch a lot of stuff in House of Commons, but I'm not sure even I'd be able to stomach an hour listening to that beery flatulence made flesh, whatever the term is used, our Nigel Foghorn of ignorance. Not sure even I could do with that.
Can we?
Yeah.
Thank
Very
you.
helpful, thank you.
Can we then move on to a quick question from Baroness Young, I think?
Just going back to the resourcing thing, but I mean, it sounds like there's not a lot of collaboration, research collaboration, or indeed funding collaboration between your networks and Porton Downs networks. Is that the case?
That's fair to say. I don't think I've never done a collaborative project with Porton Down. Either the DSTL bit of it or the UKHSA bit of it.
There are other people at Oxford there do collaborate with Porton Downs.
Particularly those who work on animal health.
Teresa Lamb. Yeah.
There isn't. There's a very, very limited manufacturing capability and experience there. To my knowledge, I can't think of anybody within UKHSA or DSTL who has the experience and industry links and so on to actually act as a coordinator of any sort of emergency response.
They could be a credible addition.
I would hope, though, that if they're spotting fresh threats, that then gets fed into the wider vaccine development community.
It will, but only to the extent that that would require somebody to write a grant to propose to get some funding to do the initial research. So it's slow.
I mean, the fresh threats are sort of spotted at a global level. You know, there's email lists that people who are in emergency response get an update saying there's a new virus somewhere or other.
Thank you.
Can we move on to Viscount Stansgate
then? You've mentioned already, in the course of the comments you've made, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, and I'd like to ask you a bit further about the way in which the UK participates with CEPI on the potential next pandemic that may hit us. Do you have views on how the cooperation is going? And what do you think is CEPI's role now? And how does it relate to the UK's role? And can we just explore this area for a moment? That's really what this question is about.
You guys are probably working most closely with the CEPI-Oxford partnership. There's a specific Oxford-CEPI relationship.
Yeah, so there's a CEPI-Oxford strategic partnership, which we do some work under, including significant work towards this 100-day mission. But as we've touched on, that's very much a global 100-day mission. It is not about UK responding quickly. It's about how do we develop technologies to make a large amount of vaccine quickly, how do we tech transfer that to manufacturers in different parts of the world. I don't know much about how the UK government interacts with CEPI or what funding comes from the UK into CEPI, but CEPI's mission really is global, and they're especially focused on low and middle income countries rather than what happens in high income countries.
You made that clear earlier too. But have you got any other thoughts on the relationship between the UK government and CEPI, as far as you can tell?
I think it's an enormously important initiative. I think it's very positive that UK government is a significant funder of CEPI, and I think the UK government probably gets very good value from that funding. I think I've got two sort of words of caution. One is sort of perhaps coming back to the eggs in one basket versus portfolio approach. You know, relying on any one organisation to make the really critical decisions in a real emergency perhaps isn't the safest approach. So I don't think that we should wholly rely upon CEPI's decision making. And secondly, as has been said, their remit is not UK. So we have, Adam declared our conflict of interest. We have, and we are seeking further funding from CEPI to improve our technology. But when that discussion turns to, okay, well, perhaps, wouldn't it be a good idea to set up something like the drills that we discussed, so that we know that we actually could make 1 million doses in a hurry, and, well, actually, probably the logical and easiest place to do that for our type of vaccine might actually be at Oxford BioMedica. That's beyond what they see as their core remit. And, they're sort of turning their eyes to UK government. I think we would like to, but we don't know who that is.
What can we learn about what other countries are doing in terms of emergency preparedness as a result of your connections with CEPI or interactions with them? And of course, you mentioned earlier that it turned out in the end that a great deal of the manufacturing of one particular vaccine was done in India. And we clearly benefited from that, did we not, ourselves?
So be interesting.
So what can we learn about what other countries are doing? What have you learned about what other countries are doing were we to face the same terrible situation again?
I think on the relatively narrow question of procuring, making available the emergency response manufacturing capability, we've already mentioned the EU and German initiatives. I think they're a very good template. I think on the somewhat bigger picture, if you look at, the really big players, US, Japan, they're investing orders of magnitude more money in vaccine technology than us. That is relevant to us. We're competing to recruit the best scientists in a global market, and frankly, we are not able to attract the best people from elsewhere to Oxford at the moment. We are largely dependent upon homegrown talent. And if you look elsewhere, US, Japan, there are serious strategic efforts to address the weaknesses in the current technology armamentarium. And the obvious one I'm thinking about is mucosally delivered vaccines, so things like intranasal or oral vaccines, which might be easier to distribute, but also might induce stronger immunity where the viral infection is happening in mild infection, and hence not just stop people getting sick, but actually stop a virus being transmitted by mildly infected people. That's what you need if you want the schools to stay open. I don't know of any UK strategy on that other than to rely on CEPI.
A PhD student.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And CEPI is also supporting significant global efforts to provide manufacturing capacity on the continent of Africa in conjunction with the WHO. It was clearly a global response that was missing during COVID. So one of their key arms is trying to enable technologies that would provide better global equity by supporting manufacturing, such as we have in Europe, getting that into Africa.
If we were to face another pandemic, would there be an element of competitiveness about where vaccines are manufactured and produced?
So yeah.
For the Hansard record, all four witnesses are nodding.
I mean, vaccine nationalism is very predictable. We saw it happening. I remember Sandy and I sitting in my office early on, sort of trying to come up with what are our big concerns, and we discussed things that thankfully never happened, which was military intervention to take vaccines from one place to another.
Netherlands.
I'm glad to say was our worst nightmare that didn't come. But lots of the things we did talk about did come to the fore. And in fact, export blocks from India during the pandemic, when they were in a particular wave where our main manufacturer was in India, or our biggest manufacturer, was a challenge. But thankfully, because of the distributed manufacturing, the big Korean manufacturer was able to step up and continue to supply countries that didn't have their own manufacturing. So that sort of approach helps somewhat, but it's never going to be entirely equitable. CEPI would love it to be. Lots of other organisations would love it to be. Morally, I would love it to be. But I also live here first. And
I'll put, it's publicly known that OXB made the majority of the UK doses of the AZ vaccine, but it was also used to supply other territories. So it wasn't just UK.
Thank you, Chair.
Can we move on to the last question from Lord Drayson?
Could I just sort of follow up the point you just made about how in Oxford you're struggling to attract the best people now. And I think the UK really was lucky that Oxford was a centre of excellence which has been built over more than 30 years, starting with Professor Moxon with the Oxford Vaccine Group. So what's going wrong with the funding? Could you address this from the academic standpoint and from the company standpoint? So availability of funding to maintain the academic excellence and the availability of funding and the view of institutional shareholders in the light of the experience that OXB and other companies went through.
This is broader than vaccines from the university perspective. Before I was at the Jenner Institute, I was in the School of Government, and the School of Government was having trouble competing with Harvard, Chicago, etc., to attract the best and brightest academics on public policy internationally, another topic that's fairly relevant here. In short, salaries are relatively low, cost of living is relatively high, and if you're the best and brightest sitting somewhere else and you can go to the US where your salary will be twice as much and the cost of living is lower, a self-interest decision is to go to the US. Or maybe Germany or lots of other places. I think that's the first big thing.
The access to grant funding, which has sustained your
I think that's
facility.
also true, that the academics more and more see the struggle to attract research funding in the UK, because if you had a great grant, you could fund a great big lab. You might be prepared to take a personal salary cut, but we don't support very well funding for PhD students and PhD projects in this country. It's quite hard as academics to get the next generation into our labs because those funding streams, many of those have been cut. It's very difficult to fund those via UKRI, for example.
I mean, the VaxHub funding we mentioned
so it's
is
not
good
just the academic
longer.
salary, the whole ecosystem for supporting academic research is struggling at the moment.
On the company side.
Sorry to butt in, but I remember a certain Prime Minister saying, we will attract the brightest and best. Didn't we hear that often? Brightest and best. Well, unfortunately, as you, my good friends in the chat and watching this live stream, we all know full well, if you want to attract the brightest and best, you pay for it, don't you?
So, you've made the point that the BIA and the industry sort of came together in a sort of the national interest.
Yeah.
But the biotech industry depends upon the support of investors to exist. What is the current attitude of those investors towards, in the light of the experience of OXB, should this happen again?
So again, not speaking as a representative of OXB, I think the investors, there was lots of positive that came from the relationship that OXB ended up nurturing with AstraZeneca. We built lots of communication with teams at AZ. We didn't have a partnership with Oxford, with AstraZeneca prior to that, and that's been helpful, that's been positive. I think the shareholders are not against doing the kinds of work that we were talking about, the keep warm type of activities, because on the proviso it's put into the pot of projects alongside all the pots of projects with other academics, mid-size, small-scale biotechs and big pharma companies. There is capacity within OXB and within other organisations to do that kind of work, and the shareholders support doing it. On the proviso, it's not made at a loss. So companies will, I think, look favourably at doing things at relatively marginal, cost to be involved conceptually. And I think there is a level still of commitment from the leadership in UK biotech companies and CDMOs to be able to do that sort of thing. I don't think that bridge has been fully burnt.
So looking forward then, you've already given us some really helpful advice about what you think that the new government should be doing in the light of this experience. So we're nearly 100 days into this new government. Have you seen any difference so far?
What do you mean? What do you mean this new government 100 days so far? What happened to the last 14 years? Let's just bypass that. Wow.
And there's been an expressed willingness, I believe, to fund Innovate UK on a 10-year cycle rather than spending review to spending review. I think that is really important.
Is the Office for Life Sciences and the new Science Minister actively working to build this vaccine capability that you point out the UK really needs?
I think possibly too soon to say. I mean, I think I'm glad Patrick Vallance is in the post he is, and I would have a degree of confidence that if anyone will, he will.
So are there any other points in addition to the ones you've already made that you'd like to share with us in terms of learning the lessons, the new government taking actions for the future?
I just speaking from my experiences sitting on the leadership team for the Medicines Manufacturing Industry Partnership for many years. I stepped down earlier this year for obvious reasons. One of our frustrations as a group was that cycle of funding and not knowing when the funding was going to be allocated. It would, we're thinking it's coming up and then the spending review gets delayed. So typically the view from the industry perspective is that often things take a lot longer than we feel they should, and then the window of funding is bizarrely, frequently, narrowly crammed into a particular tax year to deal with treasury issues, I assume. So that, if you could circumvent that in some way by having that longer window horizon, and for industry, what you need is pots of money that are relevant for competency building that crop up not once every 6 years without any warning, but they're there maybe every 6 months. There's something that you can say, I'm not ready now, but I'm there for the future. That applies, I would say, to things like collaborative R&D funding, but also things like capital support. One of my personal bugbears is, I push personally for getting a significant amount of capital support for things actually in an adjacent space, building capabilities for cell and gene therapies, and kept coming across the same problem, which is you have to be able to say to a treasury forensic accountant, you wouldn't do this project unless you had that 10%, 15% of additional support from the UK government, which as a company is very hard to say categorically. So I think taking away some of the sort of requirements for that sort of thing to encourage growth of organisations to build capabilities, and then be able to see that there's a window of potential funding for a project where you could build that relationship with your academic colleagues and go together to put a grant application in. That would be helpful.
And just finally, are there any lessons that you would say we just must not forget from this experience?
The two big ones that I think we've come back to multiple times, I'd say don't pick a winner. If the lesson is mRNA will save the day, that's the wrong lesson to take away. We need a diversity of approaches, and that the UK, having once been at the front, is now falling behind because other countries are either building capacity or building a way to pivot existing capacity to deal with an emergency in a way that's supported and funded and actionable. And we are not seeing that from the UK at the moment, and it is a concern.
I'm just sorry about him, but I'll just say hello, Evans, Pierre, and yeah, I'm very well. Hope you are so well as well. And no worries, my lovely daughter, she's popping off to do a Tai Chi. Enjoy your Tai Chi, and hopefully see you tomorrow for the Friday frolic, because we certainly will be having a bit of a frolic.
I mentioned earlier the idea of a peacetime vaccines task force and maybe retaining some of the VMIXL proceeds in the field. When we were discussing that idea, we were very much thinking about A, lessons from what had been done before, and B, how to overcome this long-termism problem. And so we talked about, could that funding actually go into an endowment or something, sort of structure like that, which is quite foreign to the way UK research is funded at the moment. But I think that could be worth looking at. And I think also one of the things the Vaccine Task Force obviously did very successfully was it was essentially a venture capital outfit, and it was very, very flexible, and they funded responsibly in the way that was appropriate to an individual project, and had very expert people making those decisions. It wasn't your typical Innovate UK call for proposals and then a year's review or whatever. So I think that there is a role, if government is seriously trying to achieve missions, and this is a mission, for that sort of VC type approach to make really rigorous investment decisions efficiently.
Thank you very much, and thank you all very much. That's been a really interesting session. As I say, we are...
You know shit, Sherlock. Very, very interesting and very eye-opening, wasn't it? Wow. Yeah. Even watching it second time round, there were certain things even I missed, and it's scary, but not surprising, is it? Really, you know. This guy sounds like Mark Rowley with a sore throat. Certainly does. But yeah, Ben, sure, we will struggle to recruit the brightest and best, while behind the scenes they are doing their best to rid us of experts. Yeah, this is why I enjoyed this committee meeting, because we had experts in, you know, no bullshit, just said it as it is, don't they? Yeah, and so there you go. It's down to education and not funding our education system. There's a country in the UK that's doing it at university level for its citizens, and it's not England. Oh, I wonder where that is. Maybe north of the border. Yeah, it won't surprise me, my friend. Yes. That was interesting, and shows you how government works when using the public purse. Absolutely. And you can, I was sat there watching you thinking, do you think there's going to be another outbreak of another pandemic? Oh, we don't look in good shape, do we? Oh, wow. Jesus. Scary or whatever. Wow. But see, the one thing that always seems to crop up when it funding, the lack of funding, and like one that talks about it's the wage. You know, why would you come to a place if you're one of the brightest and best? Why would you come to a place where there's your wage will be shit and cost of living high? Why would you want to come here? We are so embarrassing. Absolutely. I often say it often. I say I'm sometimes so embarrassed to be English, because I just think we're just so embarrassing. But very interesting. Well, like I say, I will be doing a fair few. I'll probably be doing more of these live streams, stuff like this, because I've got another idea. I'll tell you. Nice. No worries, Billy Kershaw. I certainly will do that. I think I've got an idea for doing one on Monday, which is about GB Gas, because they did one on the same day. I think there were a number of select committees on this, and for all my lovely friends in the chat who are up in Scotland, you will hear the velvet tones of a certain Stephen Flynn, who, let's just say, makes a bit of a nuisance of himself. He was very, very good. But yeah, that's what I'm going to do. The reason why I did this one at 1 o'clock today was because I thought I'd have a little look around, see who's doing any live streams. I thought, I wonder if the two Daves are doing that. And as far as I know, they're doing one for 4 o'clock. Am I right there, Mad Bunk? And I thought, right, well, what I'll do is I'll do mine earlier, and because that's the reason why I do me Friday Frolic about Friday 5ish, because I know if at 4 they'll probably finish within 5-10 minutes of mine starting. Oh no, what is Stephen Banketh? Cheers for that. I do try to make it as light-hearted as possibly can, because I know it can be irritating and really, really make your blood boil. Yes, they're at 4. Yeah, I thought they were Mad Monk. Yeah, so what I'll probably do is I'll probably pop in and say hello while I'm doing a bit of bit of work, 'cause I've got a few more videos that I've got ready to, well, not ready to be uploaded, but I'm just gonna get what research I need and what images and this and that and the other for getting them done. So yeah, no worries, my daughter. Yeah, so pop in for tomorrow. Look forward to being you there, because got one or two very fantastic videos for you. The clips that you'll enjoy as we welcome in the weekend. yeah. I should say it more often, Billy Kershaw. Smash the like button. But I'm a terrible shill, always have been. But yeah, I do try and make it as easy to digest as I possibly can. Have a good evening. I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, see you tomorrow. Simon says, yeah, I'll be heading off in a minute to myself. But what I will definitely do is I'll definitely want to get in contact to sort out you and Mad Monk and Alice as moderators, because I think I definitely do need some. It's like more often than not, I've just never really bothered, because I thought, well, not many people show any interest. So anybody causing any trouble, I'd be able to sort things out. But yeah, I think after last week, I think you're right. I do need some moderators. But anyway, I shall let you all have a breather and chill out and get yourselves ready for the professionals that are the two Davies. The two far more professional people than me, and hopefully, and when I get a chance, I'll pop in and say hello. So what I will do is I shall leave it here, and thanks for stopping by, and I hope you found this incredibly interesting. Hopefully, what I'll do Monday, I will see who's on for live stream, and so I don't jump it into anybody else's time, and then I'll set a time for then, and hopefully see. And it'll be an interesting one with about GB gas, where it's very, very interesting. Oh no, it is. yeah. I'll hopefully see you there, Mad Monk, and yeah, no worries, Stephen Bank here. So what I will do is I will just leave you here, and I will just wave you bye, and thanks for stopping by. Hopefully see you tomorrow for Friday Frolic, and hopefully see you at the two Davies it's about nearly 20 minutes time. So hopefully see you there. So bye, have a fantastic day, take care, and thanks for stopping by, much appreciated. Also thanks